Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this update from the Scientific Advisory Council. My name is David Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Research for the ALS Society of Canada, and I'm very fortunate to be also the chair of this Scientific Advisory Council. The council started in late 2018 and is evolving now in the virtual environment to be able to give some updates on where things are happening in terms of ALS research and clinical research, and to be able to answer your questions. So I am very lucky to be joined today by the esteemed Scientific Advisory Council that we have here. And so we decided this time to try something a little different. I'll get into that actually just in a second. So I wanted to first of all say thank you to the ALS Association for support of this webinar and for providing the platform to be for the Scientific Advisory Council to be able to present this morning to you. We think is the next slide. And then so the other piece is the housekeeping. So if you have a question, certainly please type it into the question box that you'll see at the side on your screen. And then we will try to go through those questions and moderate them and answer your questions, and then also formulate some good discussion that will hopefully be valuable for the audience. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the council. And the way we're going to do this is we decided to each provide just for a minute or two something that we're very excited about in ALS research as of right now in spring, summer 2020. Some of the things may be repeated, but that's because they are really exciting things, and some of the things may be even new to you. So I actually did this randomizer where, to be fair, we would find out who would speak first on the council. And we are starting with a professor of neurology from the University of Cape Town and one of the top ALS experts in Africa, in South Africa, Dr. Janine Heckman. So thanks for being here, Janine, and would you be willing to start us off?
Thank you very much, and good day to everyone. I suspect that it was the randomizer chose me because I come from A for Africa. So I work in a university teaching hospital in Cape Town in South Africa, and I thought I would just give you a brief insight in what it means to treat patients with ALS in Africa before I give you a very brief summary of what excites me about our research. So I started a multidisciplinary clinic in ALS only about 6-7 years ago to give focused care for our patients here, and it provides an opportunity to train neurologists, trainee neurologists to access and to help patients, or to the opportunity to train the next generation of neurologists looking after ALS. So apart from these trainees, we also have a speech therapist at our clinic that we have once a month. We have a dietitian, a OT, a physiotherapist, and an occupational therapist. We also have an MND nurse that from the MND Association that attends the clinic and catches up with old friends and introduces themselves to new referrals. So what is important about this dedicated ALS clinic is that it's one of 3 clinics that are held in sub-Saharan Africa, at least from the Congo belt downwards. I can't speak for Nigeria. And having painted this picture, it probably sounds to everyone very similar to what happens elsewhere in the world, except for one very fundamental difference, and that is we work in a very resource-constrained environment. So most of our patients are indigent. Some of our patients are not even from South Africa, so they can't access any state-funded disability grants once they develop ALS. Also that some of my patients live in shacks, so that we can't even give them wheelchairs because they have outside toilets, communal toilets that they have to share. And there's rough terrain outside, so a wheelchair doesn't really make their lives much easier. Some patients are also diagnosed with very advanced ALS. Last year, I diagnosed 3 patients in extremis. They came to the casualty with shortness of breath and were intubated because they did not have diagnoses. And this is particularly stressful for the physician to make and for the family and for the patient, to make a diagnosis of ALS when the patient is on a ventilator and there are only so many ICU beds available. So we also do not have access to therapies like elsewhere in the world. Even my patients that have insurance often can't access drugs like Riluzole, and we don't have other treatments available apart from obviously symptomatic treatments. But the state does not provide NIV. We are able to give patients a solid support that they can sleep on in a slightly raised, raised position. But the BiPAP machines are really given by our MND Association. They have a number of BiPAP machines that have been, that have been donated to them, and then they circulate these to patients in need. And often patients have to wait a while until a machine becomes available. We do arrange PEGs for insertion, but it is a problem in that our nurses are not very well trained to look after these. So that is a limitation. So with that in mind, but I think it's important to say that our Motor Neuron Disease Association is an active association, and they do amazing work. And despite all our limitations, our patients are cared for and loved by the MNDA and our families, and the MNDA plays a critical role. So with that in mind, just briefly, what excites me about research? Well, I thought I'd just concentrate on what happens here. We do have a small research group. About 5 years ago, we joined a consortium that's actually led by Dr. Michael Benetton in Miami, who is an alma mater of our university. And despite the fact that this program is mainly a phenotype, genotype, biomarker discovery program, so there's no therapies involved as yet, it's been produced a lot of positive energy for our staff, for our patients, and everybody's very excited to be part of an international fight, to be part of the international fight against ALS. For the first time, Africa is part of that. So I want to conclude to give a major shout out to our MNDA Association, and without them, our work as doctors would be much more difficult. I would also like to see more participation of African sites, and this particularly as we go into more genotyped, categorized or stratified trials, because we will increasingly know what our patients' genotypes are. Also, that the lockdown with the COVID lockdown has taught us the value of web-based information and teaching, and that perhaps that the unconstrained resource associations might want to share some of their teaching and materials with our local MND associations. And then finally, it's been my privilege to be part of this committee. I've learned a lot from everyone. I've only been part of it for a few months, but I look forward to remaining and working for the SSC and for the Alliance in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. That was incredibly powerful to learn about the experience that's happening in South Africa, and I think we could probably continue to build even more awareness about that in different ways, and what an avenue for the Alliance to continue to explore. So we're also joined by the Vice President of Research at the ALS Association, Dr. Kuldip Dave. Kuldip, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Hi, Kuldip.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me on here. Hi, I'm Kuldip, head of research at the ALS Association. The ALS Association is the largest philanthropic funder of ALS research in the world. So what am I really excited about? So, we all know a lot about clinical trials. We know that there are phases to clinical trials. Phase 1, where you assess safety, phase 2, where you assess safety and whether the drug works. Phase 3, whether you assess, again, safety, but also whether the drug works in a larger population. And these phases are important because we learn more and more about the drug. And these are important phases. These trials are important because this is how we find out if they're effective against ALS. Unfortunately, the way the clinical trial is set up right now, think of a soccer game, and you have to build a stadium. You play the soccer game, and then you take the whole stadium down again, and then build another one, and then you play a second game, and then you take that building down again, build another building, and then and so on and so forth. And so this would take a lot of time. It would be very costly, and essentially that's what you're doing with clinical trials. You're building new infrastructure. You have to build new protocols. You have to get new approvals. And I'm very excited about the Healy platform trial in the United States. The platform trial is something we essentially borrowed and stole this idea from the cancer field. And the idea is that you build one stadium and then multiple games can be played in that stadium. And so you have one trial with a shared infrastructure, common protocols, and so that multiple drugs can be tested in the same trial. And by doing it this way, you cut cost by a third and you cut time by a half. And this Healy platform trial is going to start with 5 compounds first. What also is really great about this trial is that placebo group is shared across the 5 groups. And so you have fewer people on placebo, and you can have more participants in the trial, and that placebo group can then be used to compare against the 5 treatments. This is really an exciting opportunity for the ALS field. We don't know how it will work, and I think that's why trials like this and initiatives like this are important. We'll need to see whether we can successfully repurpose something that the cancer field has done really well and do that right for ALS. But an exciting opportunity, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Kuldip. So next we have Dr. Nicholas Cole, who was previously an assistant professor at Macquarie University in Australia, is now the head of research for the MND Association in the UK. And Nick, what have you got for us?
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As David said, I'm the head of research for the MND Association in the UK, and we look after people with and affected by motor neuron disease, and we focus on care research and campaigning. And it's a very exciting time still, I think, despite the current COVID situation, to be involved in MND research. There's a lot of really good things happening and in the pipeline, and hopefully we'll hear about a few more of those in the next few moments or so. But one of the things that I'm very excited about, and I think is a real positive step, is the TRICALS large research initiative, which is something that involves 40 research centres across 14 countries with the goal of finding a treatment for ALS, MND in the next 5 years. So it's a joint initiative between patient organisations, fundraisers and pharma looking for these effective treatments. And it's really using joined up thinking and joined up funding and bringing the research community together to apply this to finding a treatment. And one of the aspects to this, which really ties in with what Kuldip was saying, is this platform trial. So TRICALS has launched the Magnet International Platform Trial. And again, this is looking at multiple treatments at the same time. And this involves 16 centres across 6 countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, United Kingdom, Ireland, Sweden and Australia. And the first 2 compounds that will, or potential treatments that will be tested in this system are Triumec and lithium carbonate. So as Kuldip touched on as well, there is a real advantage, we think, to this multi-arm trial design. So it gives people more chance of receiving a treatment rather than the placebo. So more people will receive treatment relative to placebo. Additional drugs can be added into the system and tested. So once the infrastructure is all set up, it's up and running. So that's a real advantage in terms of cost saving and the rapid progress that can be made in testing them. In addition to that, the criteria is also somewhat improved so that more people can actually take part in trials. So the aim is to get somewhere between 60 to 75% of people living with motor neuron disease or ALS actually to be able to take part in trials, whereas traditionally the selection criteria are a bit more narrow and it's around about 25% of people can take part. So that's a real step forward, I think, and a real advantage, and will definitely move us closer to an effective treatment. In addition to that, finally, I'd just say that the analysis that's being done now is focusing a little bit more on biomarkers in order to look at outcome measures. So that's a little bit less objective than looking at the ALS-FRS, or the functional rating scale that's used in clinical trials. So there's lots of different advantages to that. So I'd really say that if you want to find out a bit more about that, you can go to tricals.org. There's a bit more information on the website. But in addition to that, of course, there's lots of other trials that are ongoing at the moment using the more traditional or previously used methods that are, they're in phase 3. They'll be close to a readout coming relatively soon. So again, as I said at the beginning, a really exciting time to be involved in MND ALS research, and like everybody, we really hope that these trials will prove effective and show that we have an effective treatment available for people, which is what we're all desperately hoping for. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. So I think on the line, we also have one of our members, Dr. Caroline Inger from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. She's one of the foremost leaders in ALS research and care in Sweden. I'm not sure, is she able to unmute and speak? We'll see if for a moment she says.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be part of this. This is very exciting and very very interesting for everyone that is interested in ALS research. I think both researcher and from the community. And you asked before what I was most interested in or excited about this time, and I mean, of course, I have to agree with Nick that we are desperately looking for a treatment. But what I also find very exciting now is the emerging field of biomarkers and the possibility to find biomarkers that can add to our knowledge when doing clinical trials, so that we can conduct clinical trials with fewer patients and in shorter time to see if the product that we are testing actually hits the target, and not only need to follow patients for several years, but also can use these biomarkers to actually understand if the product is helping the patient. I think this is, I mean, in clinical trials, this will be essential, but we can also apply it to diagnostics and try to diagnose the patients earlier on, and then add the treatment earlier on. And that means that the patients won't be as affected as they are from the disease, but we can also use them to follow the prognosis and to stratify them into different subgroups, thus to find a treatment that is specifically interesting for that specific patients with specific traits. So I think that's a very exciting time, and I think that fields need to be expanded parallel to finding a cure.
Great, thank you very much for that, Caroline. Our next presenter is Dr. Gethin Thomas, who is the Executive Director of Research at the MND Australia, joining us from the evening there. Gethin.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for having me on this panel. So what's really been exciting me is the development of the gene therapy approaches. So as I'm sure many people are aware, that one of the biggest challenges in developing new treatments for MND ALS is that we don't actually know what causes the disease in many cases, or in most cases. However, in about 10% of cases, there is an identified genetic cause of the disease, i.e. we know which gene has been mutated. So in the last few years, technology has been developed that allows us to directly target specific genes, and this has been taken forward and been applied to MND. So currently there are 3 drugs that are in development: tofersen, which is targeting SOD1, jakifusin, targeting FUS, and another drug targeting C9orf72. These are all being championed by Biogen and Ionis, and they're looking incredibly promising so far. SOD1, as the tofersen drug, has just moved into phase 3, and I think this is going to be incredibly interesting and potentially the first drugs that really show some strong effects in ALS. And beyond just targeting those patients with those specific mutations, hopefully they'll also identify the fact that we can target those pathways, and perhaps that will then allow us to expand those approaches to those patients with sporadic disease who perhaps have disruptions in those pathways. So what we'll hopefully see, I mean, we're still under trial, obviously, so there's no definites, but we'll finally see some serious traction in treatment in the disease that will show that it is actually true that MND is not an intractable disease, and there is a lot of hope for for future treatments. So that's what I'm finding very exciting at the moment.
Thank you so much, Gathan. And last, we have Dr. Piera Passanelli, a new member with us in the SAC and a professor in ALS research at Thomas Jefferson University. And for the past 12 years, has been the scientific director of the Packard Center for ALS Research. So welcome, Piera.
Thank you for having me. It's really, I've been enjoying this meeting so far, this gathering so far, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this great group. So being the last, I think I would like to really echo what all my colleagues said. The excitement really for me in ALS clinical research is really been 2 things recently. One is the gene therapy, the antisense oligonucleotide that Gertin has just talked about, and the other one is the platform trial. So I won't repeat what my colleague said. I will just emphasize the 2 main reasons why I'm excited about these 2 parts. One is really that for the gene therapy, is really the first, with the advances of genetics really that we had recently, we have been able really to identify the cause of the disease for, yes, the small proportion of familial ALS cases, and we are really going targeted there. Now, the technology has been proven very effective in other diseases. The best examples that relate to ALS is really SMA, which is the childhood version, right, of motor neuron disease. There, the challenges were different. Perhaps the challenges in the ALS will be a little bit more complicated, being an adult onset disease, but there is no doubt in my mind that we will get there for the gene therapy. Obviously, the majority of the ALS patient population is sporadic. We don't have a cause, identified cause yet. So going targeted for any clinical trial may be more complicated. The excitement around the platform trial is, as Calvi said, that it is really a more efficient way to do trials. For me, the excitement goes even beyond the efficiency, goes really to the fact that this is really the first attempt that we have done in ALS. This is really a patient-centric platform and trial, driven trial, it minimizes the placebo, and that's incredibly important. And more importantly for me is the way the drugs have been chosen and the fluidity really of these trials, right? The drugs normally a trial is driven by the company, right, that is producing the drug. Here we have had a scientific committee that really have chosen the drugs that were proposed by the company. And although we don't know if the first 3 drugs that we will use in the platform trial will be effective, as it has been said, what really enthusiasms me is the fact that for these 3 drugs, they've been chosen by the scientific committee because we have a pharmacodynamic biomarker. We have heard from Caroline the importance to have a biomarker not only to diagnose the disease, but a biomarker also to measure progression of the disease, but the biomarker also to decide very rapidly whether a drug that is on trial, whether in phase 2 or phase 3, is really hitting the target, is doing what it's doing, and therefore we hope it's going to be effective. So far in the ALS field, we have few biomarkers to really determine the efficacy during the trial, the efficacy of the drug. These 3 drugs that may not be the blockbuster drug, but have that, and allow us really to design a trial that ultimately will give us faster, in a more efficient way, indication of whether a drug is doing what it is supposed to do or not. And so that's why I'm excited about it. And then on the research side, having said that, obviously, we have heard about the importance of biomarker. ALS remains an incredibly heterogeneous disease. And perhaps to be effective ultimately in finding a therapy and providing effective treatment to transform this disease really from a lethal disease into a chronic disease, we really have to identify a subgroup of patients. And the scientific community has really turned around with a fantastic technology, which is stem cell technology, that recently has given us the possibility to take really either the skin or the blood of the patient and redirect the skin cells or the blood cells into what we call the induced pluripotent stem cells. These have the potency to become whatever we want them to become, and therefore in the laboratory we transform them into the patient's motor neurons or the patient's neuronal cells, right? And there we have the opportunity to go really fishing and look at the molecular signature. What do I mean? The genes, the proteins, the metabolites, specific of that patient population. Now, is it as good as getting and analyzing the spinal cord of the brain of the patient? Perhaps not, because in the laboratory we are doing some little modification, but it's so far as good as it gets. And that gives me hope and the confidence in a way that we will be able, like we have done in genetics, down the line, I don't know when yet, to really identify correlating with the clinical phenotype of each group of patients, to identify a molecular signature of the patients or a specific group of patients that will give us confidence in identifying and developing targeted therapies towards that specific pathway. And I think this is a powerful tool that we didn't have until 5 or 6 years ago, and which I think can move really research and target identification forward.
Thank you very much, Piera, for that. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that we have 3 members who were unable to join us today, but have been really great contributing members to the SAC. So Dr. Liu King from Peking Union Medical University in Beijing, a neurologist there who leads care and research. Dr. Luis Barbado in Uruguay, who's at the Institut Pasteur and is a key researcher, especially in the immune responses and a particular therapy that is in coming forward to phase 3 clinical trial and working on the preclinical data on that, called masitinib, as well as other things. And also a leader in ALS research from Italy, and a neurologist and head of the ALS clinic at the University of Torino, Dr. Adriano Chio. So we are unfortunately missing them today because they are amazing as well. And we look forward to having them in future SAC meetings. I'm gonna, before we get to the questions, I'm gonna say what I think I'm most excited about. I'm certainly gonna double down on what everyone said. I think where we're at in terms of development of how clinical trials are run, our ability to start understanding how we're going to get to personalized medicine, and the ASOs, the genetic targeted treatments that were spoken of, those are going to be the first really ALS specific targeted therapies. And we have a lot of things in the pipeline right now in phase 3 and late phase 2 that might be interesting therapies that could really become real prescribable therapies for people with ALS. So those are all really exciting things at the clinical realm. I think what I'm also very excited about, and I know it's possibly not the place where most of the audience is going to be interested in terms of the immediate and the now, but a lot of the research dollars that go into ALS investment from societies like myself and like Culdips and NICS and Gethens, go towards basic and laboratory research. And often we are asked why that those are the places that we put stuff. And I think it's because we also have a subset of ALS and a subset of our understanding of ALS that's still evolving. And we're gonna probably have some great treatments coming out of the trials that are there today. But we also are developing an environment to catch some great new treatments that are gonna come from our understanding of the past 5 to 6 or 7 years. And the crazy thing, I think, in ALS is that in the past 5 or 6 years, our understanding of this complex disease has evolved with understanding a whole new subset of biology that scientists in general didn't even know. And in the past, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we were just learning about that new biology. And where I get excited is this year, actually, and I'll shout out to Piera, who's the scientific director of the Packard Center, going to a meeting like the Packard meeting, and you see that now have we not only learned about this complex biology, but we're already getting to therapeutic targets that are unique to ALS, that are getting through that next step of understanding in the lab whether some of these will be real clinical targets. And now all of those developments that have been talked about in terms of running trials better, running them faster, more efficiently, are ready to catch that next generation of treatments that everyone in the audience has invested in to get us to the next set of really making ALS gone, a future without this disease. So I think we're in an exciting time now in 2020 clinically with our potential to have treatments in the near future. And I think we're setting ourselves up for a true understanding of the basis of the disease that in the years to come is going to be expedited or sped up to the point where we can get some treatments that will even extend our ability to slow this disease down even further. And so for me, I'm very excited about where we're at all levels. And as someone who's been in it for a long time, it just feels like we're circling in on something really, really special. So,
David, can I add something to that, just very briefly? I think as a basic researcher like you, I share that excitement. But what I would like really the community to know, I've been working. Obviously, research is a continuous evolution, right? We wouldn't call it research if we knew really what we look for, right? And so while I'm excited about all the discoveries that come from genetics that really made us look at different aspects of the disease that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started working on ALS, we didn't even know that could be part of ALS. I think that we cannot really say, yes, we are excited, but we cannot really say when those findings will really be translated in effective therapies or in the development of effective therapies. What I think is very important for the community to know is that the mindsetting, thanks to all the associations that we have here on this panel, the mindsetting on the ALS research community really changed. While when I started 25 years ago, it was really basic research for the fascination, right? We researchers really like to research because we like it. The mindsetting changed, so every person in the laboratory, even my trainees now, in general, in the community, there is always an eye of whatever finding that can be a therapeutic target or a biomarker, as we have heard. And I think that is what will propel for a faster and more efficient way to really do research. That is really, I think, what the basic research contributes now by really going directly and talking to the clinician.
And I think actually you've just explained partially why I, as an outside person, are so excited to see basic researchers, laboratory researchers having that change in mindset, and being able to observe that is something I'm excited about, because I see this as a continuum now between the discovery phase and the clinical phase, and really everybody trying to come globally together to figuring out how we can get to treatments, because that's really the only thing that we care about at all levels. And so thank you for adding that. That's fantastic. So we do have a couple questions. I'm going to start off with one question. There was definitely some individuals in the audience who were very impacted by the words that Janine had, that Dr. Heckman had. And there were some questions around what we can continue to do as a global community to support underserviced and countries that have less resources. And I would say that for that case, we certainly, the Alliance this would be a great question for the Alliance as a set of societies. But there's an additional research related question, and it comes up often around the world, and that is, how can we get clinical trials happening in countries that don't typically have them, and what is the process by which clinical trials are decided upon where they're at? Quite often someone will see something that's an experimental therapeutic that they're very excited about, and they won't have access to even being a part of the study. So perhaps if I defer to a clinician who's on TriCals, that's Caroline, maybe perhaps you could respond to how it's selected as to where trials happen.
Sorry. So do you hear me now?
Yeah. Put you on the spot. My apologies.
No, so to repeat the question, your question is, why do we select the specific products that we do to go on for trials?
No, so actually, I think the question was more around how is it chosen where a particular trial is run. So I'll give an example. A Biogen trial of the ASOs, or Brainstorm is one that frequently comes up. Is it 6 sites in the United States? What would dictate where those are typically held?
So that's a very interesting question, and that has been also a debate about who gets to run the trials or not. So basically, every time you are approached by a pharmaceutical company to do trials, they do an inquiry about your facilities and your knowledge in that specific site. And usually it's about how many patients or in ALS patients you see per month, half year or year, and how many patients you are able to screen and include in the study. So you need to have some specific facilities to be able to conduct the trial in a specific way. But it's also really important that you can include a specific amount of patients. In some of the trials, we have had several sites in some countries, and so each site has only been able to maybe include 1 or 2 patients. And then we've kind of come up to that it's better to have bigger sites with a higher possibility of including patients, and that the patients come to that specific site, and that you hold the knowledge high and you can keep developing or evolving the site, the management and the knowledge in the clinical trial team at that specific site. But that also means that some of the countries who doesn't see that many patients will never be included as a trial site, and that excludes specific, entire countries. So that could be debated, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Did anyone want to comment further on that?
I'd probably add something that perhaps one of the, I guess, small positives that may come out from the COVID situation is kind of the changes that companies and researchers have had to put in place and adapt to the situation. So being able to do trials a little bit more remotely to maintain ways of analyzing patients, etc., with telemedicine, that kind of thing. So I guess in the future there might be hope that more people affected by motor neuron disease, ALS, could take part in trials in other countries and other locations, because there's been a great improvement in that ability to maintain trials remotely. That will only work for some particular trials, depending on how it's monitored. But there are some trials that have gone really well even through the pandemic, because the design has been so good and they've had the ability to maintain that monitoring and a really well thought out plan before the trial starts has allowed them to adapt and to maintain that. So I think that that would be something that would be great, to get more people involved from different countries. And as you said at the start, that's one of the things that, as an advisory council and the part of the alliance, we're trying to involve everybody, because this is also a global disease that we want to see ended.
Great, thank you, Nick. Anyone else?
So in the United States, obviously, which now is not only United States based, there is the Northeastern ALS Consortium, right? And that has really allowed us to really do multi-center trials. So involving, because the numbers of people or centers were not able to enroll as many patients as other centers, now if we pool all our resources together, then we have a multi-center trial that really allows us to get to the meaningful number of patients enrolled in a better time, again, working together. I believe that in Europe, this alliance is also starting to form, so pooling different countries together. And that is another way really to involve many centers. The platform trials that we have talked about, in fact, involves 54 centers around the United States. And so even enhancing that efficiency. And then I would really like to echo what Nick said. Really, there is a silver lining in COVID, because even for the platform trials, we are now revising our protocol to really be able to do something remotely for these patients. And so that will really open up possibilities.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would also add on my end that it's exciting to know that there might be the potential to run treatments widely, and I think, as Caroline mentioned, that especially with industry trials, they're often choosing their sites based on where can they run it as quick as they can, based on the relationship they have, and as cost efficiently as they can to try to get an answer. And then thinking about what Janine said earlier, I think it would be really great that when there are real therapies, we can figure out globally how to get those real therapies to a wide audience of individuals around the world. But of course, I mean, what Nick said and what Pierre just said is also awesome, because if there are ways that the current model of industry trying to make sure they do it as fast and as cheap and as quick as they can to get an answer and adapt to a remote situation, then maybe we can also get those experimental therapeutics into places that they wouldn't normally be. And And with the nature of ALS, that's so important because, you know, it's important to get the treatments there, but it's also important to get the experimental therapeutics because of the nature of it being a rapid progressing disease. And so I mean, thank you all for those comments. I'm just going to switch because I think there are a couple other questions that Nick's mention of COVID actually had brought up or kind of connect to. And the first one is actually, I'll direct this towards Janine as one of the clinicians on amongst the group. There's a question around if there's a vaccine developed, would there be any concern around individuals with ALS needing to have specific caution in your medical opinion? I know it probably isn't a research question, but it would just, for the audience, they had asked about whether or not there may be some considerations that need to be taken for ALS specifically when taking a vaccine once it's eventually available.
Sure, that's a difficult question. Of course, the problem with ALS would be your neuromuscular compromise. I mean, we know that COVID causes problems with lung perfusion, alveolar oxygenation, as well as effects on blood vessels. But and obviously people that are at risk with neuromuscular failure and respiratory compromise, one would think might be more at risk with COVID. I'm not sure that there would be any particular reason why vaccinating people with ALS would be a particular risk. And so I'm not sure that I've got an answer for that. I have actually just this week had a patient who's got a Kennedy syndrome, bulbar spinal muscular atrophy for the last 30 years, and he has a VC of a vital capacity of less than 50%. And he had quite bad COVID, and he managed to shrug it off, and he is going home, and despite the fact that he's not a young man and that he's got diabetes and hypertension, all the risk factors that really should have been disastrous, and he was fine. So and I hope I don't have any more experiences of any other patients, but from that N equals 1, yes, I can't actually answer the question on the vaccination front, but I wouldn't think there's a problem.
Perhaps somebody else might know, but I think people with MND ALS are able to or recommended to take the flu vaccination without any issues. So if we hopefully do get a vaccine for COVID-19, I don't think that'll be a problem. I don't know if anyone else would, or the clinicians will know more about that than I would.
That's a good point, Nick.
Yeah. Okay. So another COVID-related question that we have from the audience is relating to trials in general. And so there have been some webinars by NCALS, by NEALS, the Alliance, which have talked about how clinical trials are moving forward with respect to COVID. I think a lot of them have talked about individual centers having different ability to evaluate the participants, particularly the ones that are related to pulmonary function tests or SVC have had some differences in centers. There's a question around whether or not there's any knowledge about specific trials that have been significantly delayed because of the COVID-19 situation. And I guess I'm asking the panel if anyone's heard of any that have had significant delays, as I've heard on most of the webinars I've been in that they've managed to get through it fairly well in terms of still getting evaluations and data in. There may be a tiny bit of data loss in some of them, but hopefully not enough that it would affect the outcomes of the trials. But out to the wide panel, whether anyone has heard about a trial that has specifically been delayed because of COVID-19. Anyone? So I think silence is a good thing. Please go
I
ahead.
I can go, David. As you said, while there have been some delays due to COVID because trial sponsors have had to adapt to this new environment, I wouldn't say substantial delays, or at least I haven't heard about substantial delays. I think trial sponsors and trialists are coming up with very unique and novel ways to, whether it's sending drugs directly or placebo pills directly to participants in the trial, whether it's getting virtual measures through a computer, through a phone. I think these adaptations are really helping them stay on track, even if they may have been slowed down a bit. And so I haven't heard of sort of major substantial delays.
Yeah, I would say that our TUDCA trial has been temporarily paused, but is in place for amendments being put in to take remote sampling of blood and outcome measures, etc. But I mean, on the good side, as I said before, trials like Neurone, arimoclomol from Orphazyme, and interleukin-2 for our Miracles trial, they've all managed to proceed and move forward and still got their dates for readout. So, you know, I think the amazing preparation of trials by different people in partnership and the great efforts that people with MND ALS have gone to make these things work and keep it moving has been absolutely outstanding. So, you know, it's certainly not a case of doom and gloom, that's for sure. So yeah, there are examples of trials that are paused and they're ready to hit the ground running as soon as you know, they're able to. So there are some positives, really.
Great.
I think it's a similar case in Australia that we've had most of our trials have kept going. Certainly trials like copper, ATSM, that's an oral drug. That was quite easy to keep going. I think there was a bit of a pause on the tofersen Valor trial just because of the spinal injections needed. They were a bit worried about the potential extra strain on medical resources, but we've been very lucky in Australia that the impact of COVID's been a lot less than it has in other places in the world, and pretty much I think the medical system is back up and running as per normal. So I think all those trials are back running again now. So I think we've been very fortunate here that the impact hasn't been that great, and where it has been an impact, as Nick was saying, the clinics and the doctors and the pharmaceutical companies have worked really hard to see how they can keep this going to minimize the impact on patients.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think even, I'm not sure if anyone mentioned Orion's another one that is set to, I think, read out very soon and has a pulmonary function test as its primary measure. And I have not heard even about that having delayed. So I think the positive piece there is that most of the ones that are set to read out in the next year should still read out in the next year, which is great, because if any of those are real results, then we may have a potential new treatment.
Even for the platform trial, where it's not the primary measure, but is one of the important measures, is respiratory function. It has been likely delayed, right? Because we were scheduled to start really at the end of March, if not mid-April. And now we are on track to start the trial enrollment, right? Enrollment didn't start at the beginning of July. But there has been an amended protocol to really do spirometry, measure respiratory function remotely. And so should, and God forbid, but should the second wave come at that point, we are all prepared to really continue the trial and remotely.
Great, thank you. So we have, actually, that leads to a perfect last question that we have on the list, and we're already up to 7:55, so we'll leave this as one of the last questions, and it's around the platform trials again. question is the difference between the two platforms that were mentioned, the Healy and the Magnet platform by TriCals. And then a mention, and perhaps Nick could be the one to allude to this, about the MND SMART trial that's happening in Scotland as a third platform trial. So maybe Nick, Kuldip, Pierre, anyone who would like to chime in on the differences between the three platforms.
Yeah, I'll let Kuldip take the after myself. But the MND SMART trial in Scotland is testing two compounds again at the same time, and that's and we're actually the TriCals Association is working together with the SMART trial as well now to combine the locations. So SMART is temporarily paused through COVID, but all set to go in Edinburgh, and trying to recruit more locations and get it started around the UK. So in terms of TriCals is looking at a few more biomarkers than the SMART trial at this point in its design, with obviously more countries involved. So I don't know, Kuldip, if you want to talk about how that would differ to the Healy trial.
The Healy trial, I think from the efficiency and structure, frame of reference, I think they're very similar. The Healy trial has, and Pierre may know this better, I think about 52 sites across the United States, give or take a couple. And I think the biggest difference is the compounds that are being tested in the Magnet trial versus the Healy trial. There are different compounds or different therapeutics being tested. I think those are really the differences. I would say mainly the drugs and how they may be chosen. The different steering committees and scientific committees that would choose what therapeutics get tested and entered into each of the platform trials. That's how I would say they're different. The use of biomarkers is also fairly a big part of the Healy trial. As there are 5 different therapeutics and a shared placebo group, it is going to be important to look at biomarkers that are changing, that are more specific to each of the 5 therapeutics.
Anyone else? So
yes, I'll probably just over to you, Gethin. Sorry.
I was just asking, I thought I heard there was a difference in the duration of the trials as well between the TriCals and the Healy trials. I think it was one for 1 year, perhaps one for a different time period. I can't remember exactly what the details were.
Yeah, well, I guess
So,
each compound will be tested for different amounts of time depending on how they work and how they're looking for efficacy. Yeah, and certainly the outcome measures that are being measured between the trials, there are more outcome measures being measured in TriCals and SMART, but I guess as time goes on, there'll be a kind of convergence and an understanding of the things that are important to be measured for all of them, the Healy as well.
So I don't know much. I don't know much about the other trials. So the platform trial is a 6-month trial, right? And Nick, when you talk about outcome measures, do you know what are the differences? Because the platform trial has a very kind of comprehensive primary and in particular comprehensive secondary outcome measures. And just for me, it would be very nice to compare, as you said, perhaps to really make it a little bit more homogeneous moving forward, which would be important to do. Do you know what are the outcome measures on top of your head for the TriCals?
Not on top of my head. I won't be able to exactly say what the difference is between the two, but yeah, that's a really interesting point, and yeah, we'll find out what that is and get back on that for sure. That's an important point.
I think the length thing too, maybe also that the US and the FDA and the EMA both call for different measures in the end, and EMA tends to ask for longer trials, and that's survival data, and FDA tends to be more ALS-FRS related as well. So it may be part of the difference. Also, one of the things I would love to shed out, and I know we're done here very quickly, is that there's the brought up about earlier that Pierre brought up about personalized medicine, and one of the TriCals is a compound that has been tested many times before for ALS, but they found specific people when going back that may respond to that drug due to a specific genetic marker that they have. And so in a completely unique way, they are able to start looking at whether or not previously tested things may actually have worked for a few people. So I think that's an interesting spin on one of the drugs, but that's just one of the things I'm also excited about, and sometimes I have trouble containing that. So, okay, we're at 8 o'clock. We have exhausted the hour. Thank you so much to all of you for coming and joining with your expertise. It's so wonderful to be able to work with you on this council. Really grateful for that. And thank you all for attending. We are very grateful on behalf of the ALS MND Alliance. Please go look at your local society, donate where you can. This is ALS Awareness Month. This is Global ALS Awareness Day. Many people are trying to fundraise in the time of COVID, so all of your support in any way goes towards really wonderful things that I think are going to happen in the years to come with ALS, and hopefully as soon as possible. We know it will never be fast enough, but I can tell you that everyone is doing everything they can to try to get treatments to you. So on behalf of the ALS MND Alliance, thank you all. Have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.